The academy was silent as the instructor walked into the great hall. It was a place built from shining steel and glass where the banners of many alien empires hung from the high ceiling. Young cadets from dozens of worlds sat straight in their seats, each wearing uniforms marked with their species' colors. They came here to learn the science of war, the art of strategy, and the secrets of victory. The instructor, an old alien with gray skin and sharp eyes, stepped to the front. His voice was calm but strong, and it carried through the hall like thunder. He asked a single question, one that every cadet had dreamed of answering. "What is the fastest way to end a war?" he said. The words floated in the air, heavy and sharp. The cadets leaned forward, eager to answer. One alien cadet, tall and covered with scales, raised his hand. "With overwhelming firepower," he said with pride. "Destroy the enemy fleets before they can strike back." The instructor nodded but did not speak. Another cadet with blue skin and 4 arms spoke next. "Crush their supply lines, starve them, and leave them with no strength to fight." Murmurs of agreement filled the room. The instructor still gave no answer. A third cadet, thin and insect-like, stood proudly. "Force them to surrender through fear. Use terror as a weapon." The room grew quiet, some nodding, others frowning. The instructor turned slowly, his eyes searching the hall. At the very back, sitting almost unnoticed, was a human marine. He was not dressed in fine clothes. His uniform looked worn, his boots scuffed. His posture was straight but relaxed, his eyes calm like still water. The instructor's gaze stopped on him. "You, human," the instructor said, his voice cold. "What do you say? What ends a war the fastest?" The Marine rose slowly, every eye in the hall turning toward him. The cadets whispered among themselves, many low. King softly, humans were newcomers in the academy, considered weak, emotional, and primitive. The Marine did not look angry, he did not look afraid, he simply spoke in a quiet but steady voice. "Be human," he said. The hall erupted with laughter. Some cadets slammed their hands on their desks, others hissed in mockery. "Be human? That is no strategy," one shouted. "Humans are soft, humans are weak, humans do not understand war," another added. Even the instructor raised his brow, unsure if it was a joke. But the Marine did not sit down. He looked at the crowd, his eyes sharp, his voice calm. "You asked the fastest way to end a war," he said. "It is not firepower. It is not fear. It is not destruction. It is remembering to be human." The laughter slowed, some cadets frowning, others curious. The instructor tilted his head. "Explain," he commanded. The Marine nodded. "In our history, we fought wars like every other species," he began. "We built weapons, we destroyed cities, we broke each other with fear and fire. But war only truly ended when we chose something greater, when we showed mercy to the defeated, when we chose to protect the weak, when we forgave instead of enslaving. That is how wars end, not with the destruction of enemies, but with the rise of peace." The hall fell into silence. No one laughed now. The words carried weight like heavy stones. The cadets looked at each other, unsure what to say. The instructor's eyes narrowed, studying the Marine. He saw no arrogance, no fear, only truth. Still, he was not satisfied. "Words are easy," the instructor said, his voice low. "Anyone can claim wisdom, but war is not philosophy. War is blood." He leaned forward, his eyes glowing in the dim light. "Tell me, human, how can your mercy stop an enemy who comes to destroy you?" The Marine did not flinch. He answered with the same calm tone. "You cannot stop all wars with mercy," he said, "but you can end them faster by showing enemies they are more than soldiers. When they see that you treat them as beings, not as targets, they question their orders. When they see you save the weak instead of crushing them, they hesitate. And when they hesitate, the war changes." The words hung in the air like a storm before lightning. The cadets shifted uncomfortably, some sneering, some thoughtful. The instructor did not smile, but his silence showed interest. He had asked this question to hundreds of cadets across years. He had heard every kind of answer: power, fear, destruction, control, but he had never heard this. At last he spoke. "Very well, human," he said, his voice slow. "If you believe this, then you will prove it." The hall filled with murmurs again, excitement mixed with disbelief. The instructor turned to the Great Wall, pressing his hand against a glowing panel. The hall lights dimmed, and the air filled with the sound of machines awakening. "Tomorrow," the instructor said, "we begin the war simulation. You will show us if your humanity has power or if it is only weakness." The Marine gave a single nod. He sat back down, silent, calm, unshaken. The other cadets whispered, mocking him still, but in their hearts, some felt something new. Not fear of his strength, but fear of his conviction. The question of the day had not been answered. It had only begun. The next day came with the cold glow of artificial suns rising over the academy domes. Cadets marched into the Hall of Simulations, their boots echoing on the steel floors. Massive screens stretched across the walls showing battlefields of distant worlds, burning skies and broken cities. The air buzzed with tension, for today the human Marine would be tested. The alien cadets whispered to each other as they entered. "He will fail," one said with a smirk, his scaled face shining under the lights. "Humans are storytellers, not warriors," another hissed, her insect wings clicking. They laughed, confident that the Marine's words from yesterday would crumble under the weight of battle. The instructor arrived, his presence silencing the room instantly. He stood tall, his gray skin glowing faintly in the cold light. "Today," he said, his voice deep and steady, "we will see the truth of the human's claim." The cadets straightened, their eyes fixed on the Marine at the back of the hall. The Marine rose from his seat, calm as ever. He walked forward with steady steps, every eye following him. He carried no weapon, no device, only the standard academy uniform and a gaze that never wavered. He stopped before the instructor, standing firm as the old alien studied him. "You spoke of humanity ending wars through mercy," the instructor said, his voice sharp. "Today, you will show us if this is wisdom or only weakness." The Marine nodded once, no fear in his eyes. "I will show you," he answered simply. The simulation chamber opened, vast and glowing. Inside was a battlefield recreated with terrifying detail. Cities in ruins, skies on fire, armies gathering on the horizon. Each cadet would command a fleet, a squad, or a division. Victory was measured not by survival, but by total control. The cadets entered with pride, their minds sharp. One by one, they unleashed their plans. Orbital strikes lit the sky. Artillery shattered mountains. Fleets swarmed through space like burning storms. Every tactic screamed of domination, destruction, and fear. The Marine, however, did not rush. He ordered his squad to secure civilians trapped in the ruined city. Instead of firing on enemies, he built shields around the weak. Instead of striking first, he positioned his forces to block attacks aimed at refugees. His strategy was mocked instantly. "Look at him, wasting time," one cadet jeered as his fleet unleashed fire. "He saves ghosts while the enemy shouts." "Her strength," another laughed. The hall outside the simulation echoed with cruel amusement, yet the instructor's sharp eyes never left the human. The simulation advanced, battles raged, and chaos filled the sky. The Marine's forces looked weaker with every passing moment. His ships were older, his weapons smaller, his numbers fewer. But something strange began to happen. Civilians saved by the Marines started helping him. They provided supplies, repaired his damaged equipment, and carried messages across dangerous ground. Some enemy forces, confused by his mercy, began to hesitate. They saw comrades spared instead of slaughtered. They saw soldiers treated as prisoners, not corpses. One alien cadet slammed his fists on the table, his insect wings trembling. "This is foolishness," he spat. "Showing mercy weakens war." But even he could not ignore the results. The Marines' forces were small, yet they endured. The enemies attacking him grew slower, their strikes less certain, their morale shaken. The instructor leaned closer to the glowing screen, his eyes narrowing. He whispered to himself, unheard by the cadets. Interesting. Hours passed inside the simulation. Alien cadets conquered territories, burning everything in their path, but the Marines' small squad held strong, not through fear, not through overwhelming power, but through something no one else used, compassion. As the simulation reached its midpoint, the Marine stood in the center of the battlefield, his squad surrounding a group of rescued civilians, his forces battered but unbroken. and for the first time the laughter in the hall began to fade, replaced by silence. The instructor could feel it. Doubt had entered the minds of the cadets. What if the human was right? What if war was not only fire and blood? What if there was another way? The simulation entered its second phase, and the battlefield grew darker. Flames spread through ruined cities, skies turned red with burning clouds, and the sound of endless cannons filled the air. The alien cadets controlled fleets and armies with cold precision, striking at each other without mercy. Every strategy was sharp, brutal, and designed to crush. But the Marine moved differently. He gave no order to destroy for glory, no command to slaughter without reason. Instead, he searched for survivors, gathered scattered soldiers, and built defenses around the helpless. He fought not for control of territory, but for the lives caught between the fire. The cadets outside the chamber sneered. "He wastes his strength," one hissed, his scaled fists tightening. "While we carve victory, he plays the role of a shepherd," another laughed. But their laughter no longer filled the hall with confidence. It carried a nervous edge because the Marine squad did not break. His soldiers fought with a strange power, each one ready to sacrifice for the civilians they protected. When ammunition ran low, civilians delivered supplies. When shields collapsed, strangers stood in the way of enemy fire. Every act of mercy created loyalty, and every act of loyalty became strength. The instructor watched with narrowed eyes, his hands stroking his chin. This was no accident, no blind chance. The human had chosen a path no other species dared to test, and the battlefield itself was changing. Soon, 3 alien fleets joined forces against him. A storm of fire rained down from orbit. Cities collapsed under bombardment. Skies split with the roar of war machines. Even the cadets who mocked him fell silent, watching the small human squad stand against the impossible. The Marine did not shout orders with panic. His voice was calm, his commands precise. "Hold the line," he told his squad, "not for victory, but for those who cannot defend themselves." His soldiers obeyed without question, their eyes burning with a fire that no simulation could measure. The fleet struck harder, explosions lit the ground like suns. Waves of alien soldiers swarmed. The Marines' defenses cracked, his numbers thinned, yet still they stood. Civilians clung to them, refusing to run, as if they had seen in these humans something greater than survival. And then it happened. An enemy force broke through the defenses, charging with weapons raised. But when they saw the humans shielding civilians instead of retreating, they froze. For the first time, hesitation entered the simulation. The alien soldiers glanced at each other, their movements faltering. The program measured it as a delay, but the cadets watching felt it as doubt. "What is this?" whispered one cadet, his voice low. "Why do they hesitate?" another murmured. The instructor leaned forward, his eyes flashing. "They hesitate because they see something they do not understand," he said softly. The Marine seized the moment. He spoke into the comms, his words steady. "We do not fight to kill you," he said. "We fight to protect, to remind you that even in war, we are still more than enemies." The message carried across the battlefield, heard by allies and foes alike. The silence after those words was louder than any explosion. The instructor's jaw tightened, for he understood the danger of such power. Fear could be broken by courage. Weapons could be broken by stronger weapons. But mercy, that was something no empire had prepared for. The battle raged on, but the Marines' enemies no longer fought with certainty. Their strikes slowed, their voices shook. In the observation hall, cadets who once laughed now sat in silence. Some leaned forward, their hearts racing, for the human was not winning through numbers or firepower. He was winning through something else, something that threatened to shatter everything they had been taught. The instructor clenched his hands behind his back. This test had become more than a simulation. It was a lesson, and one that even he could not ignore. The battlefield shook as the final stage of the simulation began. All the remaining alien fleets turned their fire toward the Marine. It was no longer a test of strategy. It was a storm designed to crush. The skies burned red, the ground split open, and the roar of weapons was like the voice of gods in anger. The Marine stood at the center, his squad scattered and wounded, civilians huddled close, terrified yet unwilling to leave the humans who had saved them. The Marine raised his hand and gave the order, his voice calm but heavy. "Hold the line," he said, "not to win, not to conquer, but to protect." Enemy forces surged forward. Thousands of alien soldiers marched in formation, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. Starships above unleashed fire, turning the horizon into walls of flame. Every tactic screamed of overwhelming force. The human squad dug in. They set up barriers. They carried the wounded. They stood shoulder to shoulder. Each soldier knew they could not survive, but still, none broke. The will of humanity was forged in struggle, and here it burned brighter than ever. The instructor watched from the observation hall, his sharp eyes narrowing. This was the breaking point, the moment when even the strongest should fall. Yet the humans fought as if their defeat would mean more than death. They fought as if protecting the innocent was worth more than victory itself. The cadets leaned forward, their breaths caught. They had expected to see the human crushed, erased, humiliated. But what they saw instead was terrifying. The humans were not winning, but they were unbroken. Even as fire rained from the skies, even as soldiers fell one by one, their line did not collapse. One alien cadet whispered, his voice trembling, "Why do they not retreat? There is no logic in this." Another muttered, "They are already lost, yet they refuse to surrender." The instructor said nothing, but his jaw tightened. He could feel it too. The battlefield itself was shifting. Then it happened. A group of alien soldiers broke through the human defense, charging with blades raised. But when they saw the Marines standing in front of children and wounded instead of fleeing, something inside them cracked, their weapons lowered, their steps slowed, and for a single moment, war itself hesitated. The simulation recorded it as a delay in enemy advance. But the cadets watching knew the truth. The humans had forced hesitation into the heart of war, not with fear, not with strength, but with something far more dangerous. The Marine shouted over the comms, his voice cutting through the storm. "We do not fight because we love war," he said. "We fight because we love what war threatens to take away." His soldiers roared in answer, their voices shaking the walls of the simulation hall. Even civilians raised their fists, standing beside them, refusing to hide any longer. The enemy forces froze again. They looked at the humans not as weaklings, but as something unbreakable, not machines of war, but beings who carried a strength none of them could name. The instructor's eyes widened, for he understood what he was seeing. The humans were rewriting the very rules of battle. Their defeat should have been certain, yet their spirit was turning defeat into something greater. The cadets around him trembled, some in awe, some in fear, and deep in the silence of the hall, a dangerous thought was born. What if this was the real power of humanity? What if no empire could ever truly conquer them? The simulation dragged into its longest stage. Hours had passed, fleets shattered, cities burned, and yet the humans still stood. They were bloodied, broken, and outnumbered 100-1. But they stood. Every cadet watching could not look away, their mocking smiles gone, their silence heavy as stone. The Marine squad was down to half strength. Their weapons overheated, their shields cracked, their armor scorched. But when the instructor looked closer, he saw something impossible. The more the humans suffered, the stronger their resolve grew. Every fall of a soldier was not the end, but a spark for the others to fight harder. Civilians who had once been weak now carried rifles. Engineers who had been rescued repaired human machines with trembling hands. Even children delivered supplies through the chaos, refusing to hide. The battlefield no longer looked like a war zone. It looked like a rising flame. The alien cadets felt unease crawl into their bones. One muttered, "This is not strategy. This is madness." Another whispered, "No, this is something else. Something I cannot name." The instructor remained silent, but his eyes betrayed the truth. He too felt the fear, the awe, the strange weight of what he was witnessing. The Marine himself stood at the front, calm, steady, unshaken. His voice carried across the comms like steel wrapped in fire. "We are not winning," he said, "but we are not broken, and that is enough." Those words echoed through the hall like thunder. The cadets shifted, restless, their hearts beating faster. They had been taught that strength came from power, that fear ended wars, that control was the only path. But here was a human showing them something terrifying. The true strength came from refusing to fall even when defeat was certain. The enemy forces pressed harder, desperate to finish it, but as they charged, more of them began to hesitate. Some lowered their weapons, unable to strike civilians shielded by human bodies. Others retreated, shaken by the sight of soldiers fighting not for conquest, but for strangers. The instructor's hands tightened behind his back. He had seen countless battles, countless strategies, countless ways to win and lose. But he had never seen enemies lose the will to fight without being destroyed. It was a weapon unlike any other, and it belonged only to humanity. The Marine raised his hand, his soldiers standing in a broken line beside him. He spoke again, his voice calm yet heavy with fire. "Wars end when hearts change," he said. "You can burn cities, you can break armies, you can crush worlds, but if you cannot crush the human spirit, then the war is already over." The cadets gasped softly, their faces pale. They felt the truth in his words like a blade pressed against their throats. They saw the simulation numbers on the screen. The human squad was losing in every metric, yet the enemy's morale was collapsing. For the first time in the history of the Academy, a simulation was not ending with victory or defeat. It was ending with hesitation, with silence, with doubt. The instructor turned slowly, his eyes scanning the young cadets. He could see the fear in them, but not fear of the humans' weapons. It was fear of something deeper, fear of an enemy who could never be truly broken. The Marine's final order rang through the simulation. "Protect the living," he said, and even as the last human defenses fell, the battlefield was quiet, not because the enemy had won, but because they could no longer fight. The simulation ended with a single tone. The lights of the hall flickered back to life. The cadets sat frozen, their hands trembling, their eyes wide. The Marine stood at the center of the chamber, his face calm, his body battered, his spirit unshaken, and in that silence the instructor whispered what many now feared. "This is the hidden strength of humanity." The hall was silent after the simulation ended. The glowing battlefield vanished, leaving only the dim lights of the Academy chamber. The cadets sat frozen in their seats, their eyes wide, their mouths closed. Not one dared to laugh, not one dared to mock. The Marine stood at the center, his uniform torn, his body marked with burns, but his face was calm, steady, untouched by fear. He had lost the battle by numbers, but something far greater had been won, and every cadet felt it in their bones. The instructor stepped forward slowly. His boots echoed against the floor, each sound heavy like thunder in the silence. He stopped only a few steps from the Marine, staring deep into his eyes. "Tell me," the instructor said, his voice low but sharp, "why do you fight this way?" The Marine did not hesitate. He raised his chin and answered with the same calm strength. "Because victory without humanity is only another kind of defeat. Because war that ends without mercy only plants the seed for the next. Because when you strip away fear, weapons, and power, what remains is what we truly are. And that is what ends wars faster than anything else." The words rolled through the hall like a storm. Cadets shifted in their seats, their hearts pounding. For the first time, they questioned everything they had been taught. They wondered if all their lessons of dominance, fear, and power had been a lie. The instructor's eyes narrowed. He had trained warriors for decades. He had seen generals rise and empires fall, but never had a single cadet shaken the foundations of war with words and actions so simple. He felt a strange chill, not of fear, but of realization. He turned to the cadets and spoke, his voice deep and unshakable. "You came here to learn the fastest way to end a war. You believed it was firepower, fear, or control. But today you have seen another truth. The human has shown you that war ends not when the enemy is destroyed, but when the enemy no longer wishes to fight." Murmurs rippled through the room. Some cadets nodded in silence, their minds racing. Others looked uneasy, unwilling to accept what they had witnessed, but none could deny the power of what they had seen. The instructor turned back to the Marine. He looked at him not with scorn, not with pity, but with respect. Slowly, he bowed his head, a gesture he had never given to any cadet before. "You did not answer my question," the instructor said softly. "You changed it." The Marine did not smile. He simply nodded once, his eyes steady, his body still as stone. The moment burned into the memory of every cadet present. They knew they had witnessed something greater than any lesson in strategy. The instructor raised his voice one final time, addressing the hall. "Remember this day," he commanded. "Remember the human who stood unbroken, even in defeat." Remember that strength is not only in power, but in mercy. Remember that the fastest way to end a war may not be to fight harder, but to fight as a being who has not forgotten what it means to live. The hall was silent again, but it was not the silence of mockery, not the silence of boredom. It was the silence of fear, respect, and awakening. Every cadet knew their worlds would never look the same again, and at the center of it all, the Marine stood unmoved, not as a victor of the simulation, but as something far more dangerous. As a symbol, the Academy did not return to normal after that day. Whispers of the human Marine's words spread through every corridor. Cadets who once laughed at him now spoke his name in silence. They repeated his answer over and over, as if testing its weight. Be human. The instructor wrote his official report, but the words he chose were strange. He did not call the human weak. He did not call him reckless. He wrote, this cadet showed a power no fleet or weapon has ever matched. He sealed the report, knowing it would travel far beyond the Academy walls. Soon the story reached the ears of generals, admirals, and even emperors. Some dismissed it with scorn. Foolishness, they said. Mercy has no place in war. But others could not forget the detail that haunted them. The simulation had not ended with human defeat. It had ended with the enemy's hesitation. On distant worlds, young soldiers read the account and felt their hearts stir. They wondered if they too could fight without losing themselves, if they too could carry mercy as a weapon. The idea was dangerous, because an idea that spreads faster than fear is one that no empire can control. The Marine himself returned to his unit quietly. He did not seek fame. He did not seek glory. He stood among his brothers and sisters, wearing the same scarred armor, carrying the same tired eyes. But in the silence of his heart, he knew the truth. What he had shown could not be taken back. The instructor sat alone in his quarters that night. He wrote a single line in his private journal. Perhaps the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy is not built of steel, but carried in the soul of a human. He closed the book with trembling hands, for he knew the galaxy would never be the same. In the years that followed, battles were fought, empires rose and fell. But in every war, stories were told of a human Marine who once stood against impossible odds, not by destroying his enemies, but by reminding them they were alive. These stories became whispers, then legends, then warnings, and slowly, across the stars, commanders began to fear not humanity's weapons, but humanity's heart. In dark council chambers, leaders spoke in hushed voices. They endure too much, one said. They forgive too easily, another replied. They cannot be broken, a third whispered. And in the silence that followed, none dared to argue. The Marine never sought recognition, but without his name, without his face, his answer became eternal. What is the fastest way to end a war? The question echoed. Be human, the answer returned, again and again. And so the lessons spread beyond the Academy, beyond the empires, beyond the stars themselves, until every warrior, every leader, and every enemy knew that the most unshakable weapon in the galaxy was not fire, nor fear, nor domination. It was the soul of a human who refused to forget mercy,